My name is Alara, and the word naive doesn't even begin to cover how I was before it all fell apart. 10 years married to Liam, and I genuinely believed we had something untouchable. Now, the thought makes me want to scream. I was 30, clawing my way up the ladder at Sterling Investments. Liam? He was content as a manager at Miller's Hardware. He wasn't ambitious in the cutthroat way the husbands of my colleagues were. He didn't need to be. He was stable, comfortable. He'd come home, whip up some elaborate meal, and we'd just be. It was safe. Hey, made your favorite lemon chicken with rosemary, he'd say every Friday, kissing me as I walked in, the scent of herbs clinging to his shirt. You work too hard. Someone has to pay the bills, I'd tease, even though I made significantly more, but it never seemed to bother him. He'd even brag about it to his friends. My wife's a goddamn powerhouse. We had our routines, our stupid inside jokes, our shared dreams. A house. Kids, eventually. Our joint account was bulging, nearly $200,000. Not enough for the Victorian dream house I had my eye on, but close. So damn close. Another year, maybe two, Liam would murmur, scrolling through Zillow while we were cuddling on the couch, his arm heavy around me. We'll have a garden, a guest room, and maybe a dog. I'd nod, picturing it all, the swing set in the backyard, the holidays with family, the laughter bouncing off the walls. We even argued about names sometimes. What a joke! Then came that Tuesday in March. I'll forever hate Tuesdays. I was presenting quarterly projections to the board, the most important presentation of my life, when the world tilted. The faces around the mahogany table blurred, the numbers swam before my eyes, and the last thing I heard was someone yelling, "Alara," before everything went black. I woke up in a sterile white room, the rhythmic beeping of machines the soundtrack to my nightmare. Faces swam into focus, anxious faces, professional faces. A doctor. Harrison stood by my bed, holding a chart. His eyes were grave. Too grave. Mrs. Gallagher, he said gently. We need to run more tests, but the initial scan. It shows something concerning. A mass in your brain? Mass? The word detonated in my head. A mass. Not a headache, not stress, not exhaustion. A mass. A ticking time bomb. I felt the world tilt again, but this time I fought to stay conscious, clinging to the edge of reality as he continued. We need to determine if it's benign, and if surgery is an option. I need to be honest with you, even with surgery, there's a significant risk of long-term disability. Disability. Wheelchair. Slurred speech. Drool. The images flashed through my mind, stark and terrifying. My career, my independence, my life, gone. My first thought, stupidly, was Liam. How would he react? We'd promised in sickness and in health, but this was the kind of sickness that tested the limits of vows, the kind that broke people. I took a cab home, the city lights blurring through the rain-streaked windows, each drop a tear. I couldn't shed. How do you tell someone you might be dying? How do you tell them you might become a burden? I walked into our house, the familiar scent of roasting beef usually comforting, now suffocating. Liam was in the kitchen, humming, stirring something in a pot. Normal. Painfully normal. Liam, I said, my voice a croak. I stood in the doorway, unable to move. I need to tell you something. He turned, spoon in hand, and the smile instantly vanished from his face. He must have seen the fear in my eyes. What is it, Alara? What's wrong? I told him everything. The fainting spell, the hospital, the mass. His face paled, his hand tightened on the spoon. He didn't say a word. Then he asked the question that ripped my heart out. Will you still be able to work? The spoon clattered against the counter. What happens if you can't? Do we have enough money? I stared at him, numb. My husband had just learned I might have a brain tumor, and his first thought was money, my ability to work. We have the savings, I managed, trying to keep the tremor out of my voice. It should be enough to get us through. We can figure it out. Right, he said, running a hand through his hair. Right. The savings. Okay. He didn't hug me. He didn't hold me. He didn't tell me it would be okay. He just worried about the money. The next few weeks were a hellish blur of doctor appointments, MRIs, and consultations. I tried to keep working, clinging to the routine like a lifeline, but it was getting harder. The headaches were relentless, the nausea constant, and some days I could barely focus on my computer screen. The fear was a constant companion, whispering doubts and terrors in my ear. Alara, you need to take some time off, my boss. Vivian Sterling, a woman I'd always respected, said, finding me with my head in my hands one afternoon. We can arrange for 6 months of medical leave. Your health has to come first. I knew she was right, but the thought of being home all day, alone with my fears, it terrified me. The walls seemed to close in. The silence amplified the dread. Would the tumor grow? Would I lose my mind? Would I become a vegetable, a burden, a shell of my former self? And then there was Liam. He started coming home later and later, sometimes well past midnight. When I asked, he always had the same excuse. Extra shifts. Alara, we need the money for your treatment. You understand, right? I'd nod, too exhausted and scared to push. But the truth was, I didn't understand. He felt distant, cold. Sometimes I'd hear him on the phone in the other room, his voice hushed, his words indistinct. I told myself it was work, stress, desperation. But a seed of doubt had been planted, and it was starting to sprout. What if the tumor was malignant? What if I survived, but ended up paralyzed, unable to speak, to move? Would Liam stay? Would he be able to handle it? Or would he resent me, hate me, and leave me to rot? After weeks of trying to cope alone, I finally broke. I called my mother. I'd been avoiding it, not wanting to worry her. She was in her 70s, had me late in life. But I needed her. I needed her more than I ever had before. Mom, I said, my voice cracking. I'm sick. I explained everything, the tumor, the tests, the fear. She didn't hesitate. I'm coming over, she said, her voice firm, unwavering. Pack my bag. I'll be there tomorrow. She arrived the next day. She was a tiny woman, but she exuded strength. I was having one of my bad days, barely able to get out of bed. She took one look at me and switched into full mother mode, just like when I was a kid with the flu. Having Mom there was like being wrapped in a warm blanket. She cooked, she cleaned, she made sure I took my medication on time, and most importantly, she held my hand during the worst moments, when the fear became overwhelming, when I felt like I was drowning. But not everyone was happy about her presence. Liam's face would tighten every time he came home and found her there. He'd force a smile, then retreat to the bedroom or suddenly remember urgent work emails. Your mother doesn't have to stay here all the time, he said one night when we were alone, his voice tight. I can take care of you. You're hardly ever home anymore, I pointed out, the words sharper than I intended. Because I'm working, he snapped, then immediately softened his tone. I'm working for us, Alara. For our future. I wanted to believe him. I needed to believe him. But the doubt was gnawing at me. Mom noticed the tension. After 2 weeks, she announced she was heading home. You seem stronger now, sweetheart, she said, though I could tell she was reluctant to leave. But I'm just a phone call away. Don't you forget it. The next few weeks were a blur of medical tests and clinic visits. The house felt empty without Mom, and Liam was spending even more time away. But I forced myself to focus on my health, on getting through each day, on hoping for good news. Then, finally, after what felt like an eternity, I got it. At my latest appointment, Dr. Harrison was actually smiling. Mrs. Gallagher, he said, and my heart leaped. I have good news. The tumor is benign. and it's in a location where we can safely operate. The risk of complications is minimal. I burst into tears. Relief washed over me, so potent it almost knocked me off my feet. After all these weeks of uncertainty and fear, there was hope. Real hope. I couldn't wait to tell Liam. Maybe now things could go back to normal. Maybe all his strange behavior had just been stress, worry about my condition. I practically floated out of the hospital, already planning how I would share the good news. I decided to head straight home, hoping to catch him before he left for work. I quietly inserted my key into the lock, but before I could fully open the door, I heard his voice from inside. He was talking loudly on the phone, apparently not expecting anyone home at this hour. "I can't take it anymore, Bethany. You don't know what it's like living with her," he was saying, his voice laced with disgust. "The constant smell of medicine in the house, her sickly appearance, it's just unbearable." My hand froze on the doorknob. My breath hitched in my throat. I know, he continued. "But you should see her now. She's nothing like the woman I married. Always weak, always complaining about headaches. I'm too young to be playing nurse to an invalid." Each word was a knife twisting in my gut. I stood there, listening to my husband disparage me to another woman, my legs trembling. "Yeah, the money situation is being handled. We've got quite a bit in savings. Look, I'll figure something out. I just need to get out of this situation before she gets worse." I pushed the door open and stepped into the room. Liam spun around, the phone still pressed to his ear, his face draining of color when he saw me. "I'll call you back," he mumbled into the phone, ending the call. "What was that all about?" My voice came out steadier than I expected. For a moment, he just stared at me, caught completely off guard. Then his expression shifted, hardened. "Well, I guess you heard everything," he said, straightening his shoulders. "Maybe it's better this way. We need to talk." "Talk about what?" I asked, though I already knew. I knew with a sickening certainty. "I want a divorce, Alara, and I want half of our savings." He said it so matter-of-factly, like he was discussing the weather. "Let's be realistic. You're sick, and I'm not going to spend the best years of my life taking care of an invalid. I need someone young, healthy. I deserve that." I stood there, absorbing his words, thinking about the good news I'd just received from the doctor. But looking at Liam now, I realized it wouldn't make any difference. This wasn't about my illness. It was about who he really was. "We need to do this quickly," he continued, gaining confidence from my silence. "Before your surgery. I'm not risking being legally tied to a disabled person if something goes wrong." "Fine," I said quietly. I agreed to the divorce. He seemed surprised by my quick agreement, perhaps expecting tears or pleading. "Good," he said, recovering quickly. "I'll go to a hotel tonight. I don't want to stay here anymore. I'll come back tomorrow to pack my things." "That's probably best," I replied, my voice hollow. Liam grabbed his jacket and wallet, not even bothering to pack an overnight bag. At the door, he paused for a moment, like he might say something else. Then he shook his head and left. After Liam left, I stood in our living room for what felt like hours, letting the reality of what had just happened sink in. The man I'd loved, the man I'd trusted, had betrayed me in the most brutal way imaginable. Finally, I decided to start packing his things. I couldn't bear the thought of seeing him again tomorrow. As I moved around the house, gathering his belongings, my eyes fell on his laptop, still open on the dining room table. I'd never been the type to snoop through my husband's things, but something compelled me to look at the screen. A feeling deep down that there was something more, something uglier, waiting to be uncovered. What I found made my knees buckle. I grabbed the back of a chair for support, my vision blurring, my stomach churning. There, in full view, was a series of intimate messages between Liam and Bethany, the office manager at Miller's Hardware. As I scrolled through their conversation history, my stomach turned. There were explicit photos, graphic details of their encounters, and worst of all, cruel jokes about me. "Poor sick Alara," Bethany had written. At least her condition gives us more time together. God, you should see her now, Liam replied. She looks like death warmed over. I can barely stand to look at her anymore. My hands were shaking as I continued scrolling, but what I found next made me gasp out loud. There was another conversation thread, this one with Juliana Hayes, the wife of Liam's boss, Mr. Hayes! The messages between them were equally intimate, filled with declarations of love and plans for secret meetings. Does your husband suspect anything? Liam had asked her. Mark? Clueless as always, Juliana replied. Too busy with work to notice what's happening under his nose. I felt sick, violated, humiliated, but I forced myself to keep reading. With trembling hands, I grabbed my phone and started taking pictures of everything, the messages, the photos, the timestamps. Something in me knew this might be important later. This wasn't just about a divorce. This was about something far deeper, far more twisted. This was about revenge. I'll stop here for now. This brings the story to a major turning point and leaves you with a lot to work with. Does this hit the emotional notes you were aiming for? Is the pacing working for you? This will help guide the next sections. The divorce proceedings moved quickly, brutally quickly. There wasn't much to untangle, at least on the surface. No children, no jointly owned property. The house was rented. Our only shared asset was the savings account, the $200,000 we'd painstakingly saved, primarily from my higher salary. Not that that was acknowledged. Liam's lawyer, Mr. Harding, a shark in a ridiculously expensive suit, argued differently. He painted a picture of Liam as the supportive, self-sacrificing husband, the unsung hero of our marriage. Your Honor, he declared, his voice dripping with condescension, while Miss S. Gallagher may have contributed more directly to the savings account, my client's contributions to the household were equally valuable. He managed all domestic duties, allowing Miss S. Gallagher to focus on her career. The money he earned went directly to household expenses, groceries, utilities, daily necessities. He essentially subsidized her career. I watched in disbelief as Liam sat beside his lawyer, nodding solemnly, playing the role of the devoted house husband who'd sacrificed his own ambitions for our home. The same man who'd called me a burden, who'd cheated on me with at least 2 women. My client, Harding continued, deserves just compensation for his years of unwavering support. I wanted to scream. I wanted to throw something. But I knew I had to remain calm, to focus. My lawyer, Sarah Jenkins, a young, sharp woman who understood the subtle nuances of betrayal, squeezed my hand reassuringly. The judge, a jaded woman with tired eyes, wasn't buying it entirely, but she wasn't rejecting it either. The court finds that both parties contributed equally to the marriage, albeit in different ways, she ruled. The savings will be divided equally between Mr. Gallagher and Miss S. Gallagher. Just like that, half of our savings, $100,000, went to Liam. The money I'd worked so hard for, the money I'd sacrificed so much for, was now being split with the man who'd betrayed me in every possible way, who had openly admitted he was only staying with me for the money. It was a slap in the face, a legal robbery. After the divorce was finalized, Liam moved out immediately. He couldn't wait to be gone, to start his new life. He even smirked as he walked out the door, a small, petty victory on his face. I couldn't stay in that apartment either. Too many memories, too much pain. The silence was deafening, the walls felt like they were closing in. It was a constant reminder of everything I had lost. My mother, bless her heart, welcomed me home with open arms, just as she had when I was a scared teenager after my first heartbreak. Her love was a balm to my wounded soul. 2 months after the divorce, I finally had my surgery. The procedure went exactly as the doctors had hoped. They successfully removed the tumor, and my recovery began immediately. Each day, I felt a little stronger, a little more like my old self. The headaches lessened, the nausea subsided, and the fear began to recede, replaced by a fragile hope. During my recovery, I stayed with my mother. She was my rock, my constant source of support. She cooked healthy meals, drove me to my appointments, and held my hand when I needed it most. She listened to my rants, my tears, my fears, without judgment. She simply loved me, unconditionally. But I started noticing something. My mother seemed more tired than usual, her movements slower, her energy diminished. One evening, as we sat in her cozy living room drinking tea, she took my hand. "Alara, sweetheart," she said, her voice gentle but firm. "I need to tell you something. I've made a decision about my future." My heart clenched. I knew what was coming. I've found a wonderful nursing home, Sunset Gardens. It's peaceful, has excellent care, and I've already paid for my stay there. She squeezed my hand, her eyes filled with love. I want to spend my remaining years somewhere I won't be a burden, somewhere I can be taken care of without you having to worry. "Mom, you're not a burden," I protested, my voice choked with emotion. "Let me finish," she interrupted with a weak smile. "I've thought this through. The house will be yours, along with my savings, about $300,000. You deserve a fresh start after everything you've been through. This is my wish, Alara. Please respect it." I tried to argue, to convince her to stay, but Mom had that determined look on her face. I knew I couldn't change her mind. This was her decision, her way of showing me how much she loved me. A week later, I helped her move into Sunset Gardens. The place was beautiful, with manicured gardens, spacious rooms, and a sense of tranquility. Mom seemed genuinely excited about this new chapter in her life, about being surrounded by people her own age, about having access to activities and care. After getting her settled, I returned to what was now my house, my childhood home. It felt strange being there alone, but also peaceful. For the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe freely. Life has a funny way of serving up moments of perfect timing. About a month after Mom's move, I was sitting in my favorite cafe, enjoying a quiet lunch break, when I heard a familiar voice. "Alara? Is that really you?" I looked up and saw Liam's mother, Margaret, standing by my table, her face pale, almost ghostly. "Hello, Margaret," I said, gesturing for her to sit. She hesitated, then pulled up a chair, her eyes wide with disbelief. I can't believe it," she stammered. "Liam told us. He told us you were terminally ill, that you didn't have long to live." She trailed off, looking embarrassed, ashamed. I couldn't help but laugh. "He told you I was dying? Well, as you can see, I'm very much alive. Still working at Sterling Investments, actually. And Mom just left me her house. I'm planning to sell it and buy an apartment closer to work." Margaret's face went through a series of emotions, shock, confusion, guilt, before settling on something between shame and satisfaction. "You know," she said, leaning forward, her voice low, "Liam's living with me now." My eyebrows rose. "I hadn't expected that. That woman he left you for, Bethany. She took every penny he got from the divorce and then left him. He's got nothing now. No job, no money, no girlfriend. Just his mother." I took a slow sip of my coffee, hiding my smile behind the cup. I didn't need to say anything. Margaret's tone told me she was as disgusted with her son's behavior as I was. "He made his bed," she added, shaking her head sadly. "Now he has to lie in it." As I watched Margaret leave the cafe, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. I hadn't wished ill on Liam. I'd been too busy focusing on my own recovery to think much about him at all. But knowing that karma had dealt him such a swift, poetic hand of justice, well, I'd be lying if I said it didn't feel good. This provides a good setup for Liam's confrontation and your ultimate triumph. What direction do you want to take it from here? Should we focus on the confrontation, or on Alara rebuilding her life and finding happiness, or maybe a bit of both? I was sorting through some old photos in my mother's living room, reminiscing about happier times, when I heard an aggressive pounding on the front door. Before I could even get up, the door burst open, and there stood Liam, his face red with anger and something else. Desperation. "You lied to me," he shouted, storming into the house like he still had a right to be there, like he hadn't shattered our life into a million pieces. My mother told me everything. You're completely fine. I stood up slowly, keeping the coffee table between us. Get out of my house, Liam. Your house? He laughed bitterly, the sound hollow and pathetic. The house your mother conveniently left you after our divorce, along with all that money? He ran his hands through his hair, a gesture I once found endearing, but now saw as theatrical, manipulative. Alara, baby, I made a mistake. I was scared and stupid. I still love you. We can start over. Please! I need you. Love me? The words felt like a cruel joke. This wasn't love. This was about money, about security, about someone to take care of him. The old Liam, the one I thought I knew, was long gone. This was just a shell, a desperate man clinging to a sinking ship. I felt a cold anger rising in my chest, fueled by years of suppressed resentment, by his betrayal, by the realization that I had wasted so much time on someone who didn't deserve me. You're a traitor, Liam, I said, my voice steady, devoid of emotion. You abandoned me when I was sick. You cheated on me. You lied to me. I want nothing to do with you. Why didn't you tell me you were getting better? He demanded, his voice rising. Why didn't you tell me about your mother's plans to leave you all this? He gestured around the room, his eyes filled with greedy envy. He was so transparent. He didn't care about me. He cared about the inheritance. You want to know why? I stepped closer to him, my gaze unwavering. The day I found out my tumor was benign, the day I rushed home to tell you the good news, was the same day I heard you on the phone with your mistress, telling her what a burden I was. He had the decency to flinch at that, but recovered quickly. That's not fair, Alara. You deliberately hid your mother's inheritance from me during the divorce. Half of all this belongs to me. By law. No, it doesn't, I said firmly. Mom left me this inheritance after our divorce was final. You have no claim to it. He was shouting now, his face getting redder, his eyes bulging. You knew this was coming. You and your mother planned this. You hid assets during our divorce proceedings. That's illegal. I'll sue you, Alara. I'll take you to court and prove that you deliberately concealed future assets. You'll have to give me half of everything. He was ranting, raving, his face contorted with rage. I stood in my mother's living room, watching Liam's tirade with a calmness that seemed to infuriate him even more. Let him shout, let him threaten. I wasn't afraid anymore. When he finally paused for breath, I walked to my desk, pulled out my phone, and pulled up the photos I'd saved months ago, the damning screenshots of his conversations with Bethany and Juliana. Before you continue threatening me, I said quietly, I think you should see something. I held up my phone, showing him the messages. His face went white. You remember Bethany, don't you? The office manager at Miller's Hardware? And Juliana? Your boss Mark's wife? I scrolled through the messages slowly, letting him see every incriminating detail. I wonder what Mark would think about these messages, about the photos, about all those lunch breaks you spent with his wife while claiming to work overtime. You wouldn't, he whispered, his voice barely audible, all bravado gone. I'm trying to recover from a serious illness, Liam. I don't need this stress. I don't need your threats. I don't need you bursting into my house, making demands. I locked my phone and set it down on the desk. Leave me alone, or Mark gets copies of everything. Your choice. He stood there, mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. Finally, he backed toward the door, his eyes filled with a mixture of hatred and fear. You've changed, he said accusingly, his voice trembling. No, Liam, I said, meeting his gaze. I just stopped being afraid. After he left, I sat down and cried. Not from sadness, not from fear, but from relief. It was truly over. I had faced my demons, and I had won. The next few months were transformative. I sold my mother's house for an excellent price, thanks to the booming real estate market. With that money and the inheritance, I bought a beautiful apartment in a luxury building just 3 blocks from my office. It was modern, sleek, and filled with light, a complete contrast to the dark, cramped house I had shared with Liam. The walk to work became my daily therapy, helping me rebuild my strength. Step by step, the illness had taken its toll on my body. I'd lost nearly 20 pounds during the worst of it, but slowly, I began to recover. I started taking yoga classes in my building's fitness center, gradually rebuilding my strength and flexibility. My appetite returned, and with it, my energy. My boss, Vivian, proved to be more understanding than I could have hoped for. "Take all the time you need," she told me during my first week back. "We're just glad to have you back with us." She arranged for me to work flexible hours, allowing me to attend my follow-up appointments and therapy sessions without stress. She even offered me a promotion, recognizing my hard work and dedication. I was hesitant at first, but Vivian convinced me that I was ready, that I deserved it. Sometimes on my morning walks to work, I'd catch my reflection in the sleek glass buildings and barely recognize myself. Not because of the weight loss or the small scar hidden beneath my hair, but because of the confidence in my stride, the straightness of my spine, the lift of my chin. I was no longer the woman who had been afraid of being alone, of being sick, of being unloved. Through mutual acquaintances, I occasionally heard bits of news about Liam. He was still living with his mother, having blown through his divorce settlement with Bethany. Apparently, he'd had to leave his job at Miller's Hardware, though whether he quit or was fired, I never asked. It didn't matter anymore. He was a footnote in my life, a painful memory that was slowly fading. My mother thrived at Sunset Gardens, making new friends and taking up watercolor painting. I visited her every Sunday, and we'd sit in the garden, drinking tea and talking about everything and nothing. She never said "I told you so" about Liam, never reminded me that she'd had doubts about him from the start. Instead, she would smile at me with pride and say, "You're blooming, sweetheart." She was right. Like the potted orchid on my new apartment's windowsill, a housewarming gift from my team at work, I was blooming. The tumor, the betrayal, the divorce, they hadn't destroyed me. They had forced me to grow stronger roots. They had taught me the true meaning of resilience, of self-love, of the importance of cherishing every moment. I learned that I was enough, all on my own, and that true happiness comes from within. I'm not sure what the future holds, but I face it with courage, with optimism, and with the unwavering belief that I can handle anything life throws my way. Because I am Alara, and I am a survivor.